A new series of Wildlife on One returns next Monday. The programmes include a visit to the rockhopper penguins of the Falklands, watching the graceful antics of the pelican, and observing the spring hare, which looks like a cross between a kangaroo and a rabbit. In the first of the new series, David Attenborough looks at the elephant seal, which grows from a charming seal pup to a hefty 3-ton adult. Wildlife on One, a new series starting next Monday at 8:30 on BBC1.
The film, starting on 2 in a minute, is a powerful American drama which exposes the tragic consequences of drunk driving. Licence to Kill. In Panorama, here on 1 in half an hour, Polly Toynbee looks at the future for Britain's ever-growing number of old-age pensioners. Now, the 9 o'clock news with Michael Burke.
Britain orders its diplomats home from Iran because of the threats to murder Salman Rushdie. Iran's envoy here is told he should pack his bags, and Europe moves to isolate Tehran. And a Sentry saves 50 paras as the IRA bomb their barracks. Good evening. Britain's withdrawing all its diplomats from Iran and has told the Iranian envoy here he should leave because of the death threats made against the author Salman Rushdie. All the other European Community countries agreed in Brussels today that they will order their senior diplomats home from Tehran too. Mr. Rushdie is still in hiding, reportedly under armed guard. Iranian officials today repeated their call for him to be murdered for blaspheming against Islam in his book Satanic Verses. The Foreign Secretary called the threats an affront to civilization.
Sir Geoffrey Howe came to Brussels in search of the strongest possible European response to the threat to kill Salman Rushdie. He pronounced himself well pleased with the backing he received from his European counterparts. They face a crisis without precedent in the community's history. They've tried to respond to Iranian radicals who use a different set of rules, who've rejected talk of a compromise with contempt, who say Mr. Rushdie is a heretic who must be put to death. Since the end of the Gulf War, Sir Geoffrey Howe has tried to revive Britain's relations with Iran. The objective was not just diplomatic influence, but lucrative contracts for British business. The cold blast of Islamic fundamentalism threatening Mr. Rushdie's life has swept all that away. The handful of British diplomats in Tehran will come home immediately.
It's important to have diplomatic relations, if you can, with all countries, not for the sake of diplomats, but for the sake of people, of Britain's, of British interests. But in face of this kind of treatment, this kind of threat, there is no point in trying to maintain the shadow of a relationship out there in Tehran.
Like the Netherlands, West Germany, represented by its foreign minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher, has had warm relations with Iran since Khomeini's revolution. For those countries, much is at stake. It will now be more difficult to free hostages in Beirut and captives in Tehran. But Sir Geoffrey hopes the death sentence on Mr. Rushdie might now be lifted.
There certainly are some people there who recognize the need to establish sensible arrangements for dealing with the rest of the world. The argument will continue, and we must hope that this very clear expression of view, supported by strong, plain, united measures by the European community, fortified by others, will make an impression on the balance of argument in Iran.
Sir Geoffrey would not call Britain's action an absolute break in diplomatic relations, but it amounts almost to that. He said the European community would be looking for support around the world for what it's done. It's clear Iran faces real international isolation at a time when it's been looking for international help to rebuild the country after the Gulf War. Whether that will give the moderates in Tehran any more influence over Ayatollah Khomeini is much less clear. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Brussels.
Iran's chargé d'affaires in London has been summoned to the Foreign Office and told by an official there's no point in him staying here. Relations between Britain and Iran are effectively suspended tonight.
The message to Mr. Mohammed Basti, Iran's man in London, was that he might as well go home and take his staff with him. Britain saw no future in talking to the Iranian government. The latest round of religious zeal in Tehran has all but destroyed diplomatic relations. Nothing but an empty formality connects the two governments. When the British embassy was reopened last December, it represented the first serious attempt to communicate since the American hostage crisis. Then Britain ordered its diplomats home, fearing for their safety, and wondering what good they could do in an anarchic country. There are similar feelings tonight. Britain had hoped that mending relations might help Roger Cooper, the British businessman held for 3 years accused of spying. But his release, like that of British hostages held by pro-Iranian groups in Lebanon, seems something that Iran either can't or won't deliver. The Labour Party sympathises with the dilemma of dealing with Iran.
I think that a country like that has got to prove its right to be a part of the international community, and it has got to prove that by behaving in a civilized way and in a way that accepts international order. I'm sorry to say Iran has not offered that proof.
During an audience with the Ayatollah Khomeini today, a crowd chanted approval while the threat to Rushdie was repeated in the same chilling terms of death and damnation. Despite the genuine outrage of many Muslims at Rushdie's book, it's felt it's been elevated to a political issue by some of Khomeini's radical supporters. They see it as a way of setting back the moderates' attempt to restore Iran's connections with the outside world. In the face of such fervour, Britain doesn't expect its actions to have much effect, but it sees no point in continuing to deal with a government controlled by such swirling emotions.
Here, police are hunting 2 IRA bombers who attacked an army barracks in Shropshire in the early hours of this morning. 50 soldiers from the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, escaped injury after a sentry challenged 2 men. Lance Corporal Alan Norris fired at them, but apparently missed. Then he raised the alarm before the bombs went off. The attack happened at Turnhill Barracks near Shrewsbury. The bombers ran off and escaped in a stolen car, which was found tonight about 10 miles away.
The soldiers who live here were lucky. Fast asleep while terrorists quietly planted 2 bombs. 50 men of 2 Paro were roused from their beds by a patrolling sentry who spotted the 2 terrorists about to plant a 3rd bomb. The result was devastating, but when the explosions came, the barracks had been evacuated. When he spotted the bombers just after 3 o'clock this morning, the sentry challenged them immediately. They dumped a sports bag containing the 3rd bomb and ran. The soldier opened fire with 3 rounds from his assault rifle, but missed.
He had cleared the building of those people sleeping, and they'd cleared the area. Had he not done that at that time, then lives could have been lost, and it was from his swift, prompt action that lives were not lost.
Shortly after the terrorists fled, a masked gunman with an Irish accent tried to enter a house and hijack a car a mile away from Turnhill camp.
At 3:30, we were awakened by a very loud knocking on the front door. I assumed there'd been a road accident or something similar. I went to the front door, put the front door light on, drew the curtain back, and there was a man standing there. And he said, "Open the door, open the effing door," and in a very broad Irish accent, he got a pistol in his hand. I immediately dropped the curtain, snatched at the key, which broke in the door. When we looked again, he'd gone, dialed 999, and the police were there within 5 or 10 minutes.
The gunman next forced his way into this bungalow, 100 yards up the road. Evidently in panic, he threatened to shoot the owner's wife unless he handed over the keys of his car. At least 2 occupants drove off in the stolen red and grey Montego.
This vehicle should not be approached by members of the public, but any information relating to the vehicle should be relayed as soon as possible to the nearest police station or Shrewsbury Police Station incident room.
While there's profound relief at the saving of so many lives, for the military authorities, the alarming feature is that bombers could have penetrated so deeply into such a large army base. It clearly raises important questions about the level of security and vigilance at military posts.
Some residents, at least, are sceptical about security at Turnhill.
I believe, I know to my own knowledge, that anyone can get onto the base from the rear of it because it's not fenced.
As a careful search got underway in the Turnhill camp and in the surrounding fields and woods, the army insisted that the level of security here matched that at other bases. But as veterans of Northern Ireland tours, the Paras represent a choice target for the IRA. Inside a camp with a 9-mile perimeter, they almost scored a much grimmer success. Just over an hour ago, police confirmed that the hijacked Montego had been found in a quiet cul-de-sac of Edgemond, a village 10 miles south of Turnhill camp. Police were speculating that the original getaway plans had been abandoned after the slip-up at the army base.
The IRA bomb factory discovered by chance in this flat in Clapham convinced detectives that a terrorist campaign was underway targeting military bases across Britain. The police brought out guns, detonators and £150 of Semtex plastic explosive. But ominously, there were also empty wrappers for another £25 of the Czechoslovakian Semtex, similar to this. And the anti-terrorist squad believed that that missing explosive was used at Turnhill Barracks this morning. After the Clapham find, Scotland Yard named 2 men they wanted to question. Jim Errington left behind his spectacles, the other his fingerprints. That man was Patrick Sheehy, aged 28, a labourer from County Limerick in the Irish Republic. Detectives believe Sheehy was one of today's bombers. Last August, a terrorist bomb devastated the living quarters at Inglis Army Barracks in North London. 1 soldier was killed and 9 were injured. Again, Patrick Sheehy is a prime suspect. The Parachute Regiment has served regularly in Northern Ireland. In Londonderry in 1972, on what became known as Bloody Sunday, 13 demonstrators were shot dead by soldiers of the 1st Battalion. A month later, the IRA exploded a car bomb outside the regimental officers' mess in Aldershot. The IRA said the attack was a retaliatory operation. 5 women and 2 men were killed. 1 was a Catholic army padre. Already at Turnhill Camp, forensic specialists have more leads than is usual in the immediate aftermath of an IRA bomb attack. And although the 2nd Paras are leaving the base later this week, the lessons for future security have been learned.
The man accused of murdering mourners at an IRA funeral in Belfast's Milltown Cemetery last March went on trial today. When police told Michael Stone he had killed at least 2 people, the court was told he replied, "Brilliant." It's alleged he carried out a gun and grenade attack during the funerals of the 3 IRA members killed in Gibraltar. Michael Stone, an unemployed builder, denied a total of 38 terrorist offences dating back to 1984. The trial is expected to last 3 weeks. The government now says all hospitals are potential candidates for opting out of health authority control. The Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, gave more details today of his proposals for the future of the NHS. He wants immediate action to identify the first hospitals to become self-governing.
When the White Paper was launched 3 weeks ago, large hospitals were proposed as the most suitable candidates to become self-governing. That might have meant up to 320 general hospitals around the country. But today, publishing more detailed papers, Health Secretary Kenneth Clarke said ultimately it would make sense for all hospitals to become self-governing. These new papers on the NHS reforms also make it clear that hospitals and their staff might not have any say in whether or not they became independent. A hospital could be launched on the road to independence by anyone at all: the health authority, the hospital's managers, staff or local people, and the Health Secretary himself can initiate the procedure. Hospital doctors and staff would be consulted, but there would be no ballots and only the Health Secretary has a veto. And he also decides whether the application is granted, so he can both propose and agree to his own proposal. Any viable hospital will be eligible to become self-governing.
Eventually, there are no boundaries whatever to those hospitals that can become self-governing, so long as they're required in the service and so long as they can attract patients and their GPs to take advantage of the services that that particular hospital has to offer.
Looks as if nobody else but management is going to get much of a say in whether or not the hospital opts out. Staff aren't going to get a vote on it, patients aren't going to get a vote on it, and the local community is certainly not going to have a say, although it is their hospital and they're the people who really own that hospital and to whom it should be accountable.
Today's working papers also sketched out a little more about how GPs could become budget holders. They will control most of the NHS costs of the patients in their care. But unlike the hospitals, for them it will be entirely voluntary. Today's revelation that any hospital could be pushed into independence makes the health service review look even more radical. Doctors and managers have been waiting for today's more detailed working papers to see how